Today's subject is human body in health. It is a rather unusual title because when we look at a human body in modern medicine, we are used to looking at anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, pharmacology, different type of schema to study the human body. That is the way it has evolved, modern medicine. 500 years ago modern medicine was not like this, it was different. But today that is what we are all used to. But Ayurveda, the text that we have, the most recent is written in 600 AD. So therefore the way they looked at the human body would be somewhat different from what we are used to. So instead of talking about anatomy, physiology, biochemistry and so on, I have taken this phraseology, human body in health, where there will be references to what we call anatomy, there will be references to what we call physiology, but in a somewhat different form. Because imagination, what is imagination? It is forming images in the mind, turning them in the head and looking for new kind of relationships, new kind of linkages. This is what only human beings seem to be capable of that. Other animals, they do not seem to have this. Now once these new linkages, relationships are formed, that is imagination. The next thing is, how true are these? To settle this, you need to have, in science, if you turn, you have to do experiments to see whether these relationships that you have imagined, are they valid? That is where experiments come in. In fact, the very first lecture I quoted John Hunter's famous quote, why think, why not perform the experiment? So that is to verify the scheme that you have conceptualized, how valid is it? A great writer, he also has images, or a great musician, he has musical images. But there it is a question of how true it is to life. So many hundreds of thousands of poems were written, but people continue to read Ramayana and Mahabharata because they are true to life. That is how that is validated. So in Ayurveda you will find plenty of these schemes with the imagination which the Vedic, Ayurvedic sages had. You will see many of these, whether it is Panchakarma, whether it is physiology, but validation part is a second question. I will not be getting into this. Now the contents of today's talk, one is the body, the fabric of the body and the development of it, the fetal development, body parts, organs, vital spots, marma, a concept which is not very strong in Ayurveda today, body functions, the concept of equilibrium, a kind of generalization, then digestion, that is the only part which would more or less conform to what we understand by system of digestion, Tridosha, a very important concept dealing with functions in the body, flow of blood, heart, vessels, blood flow, the question of circulation of blood, heart as the seat of consciousness, it is a controversial, but that is a very important aspect of Ayurveda, respiration, nerves and nerve function. Now these are the topics to give you a general idea of how they conceptualize human body in a state of health. How does it appear? How does it function? Now the development of the human body, embryology, was a subject which received a lot of attention in Ayurveda, and the human fetus, they recognized that contributions from parents, nutrients and self. Nutrients are in the uterine environment, the nutrients supplied to the embryo, and self, which brings in consciousness. And the self is born by the mind, that is how it enters in the third month, you will see that, and the united seed from the father and mother, and embryo forms, that is where it takes shape. And these are important questions now when you talk of embryonal stem cell research. These questions come. At what stage can you use those? What time does it become conscious? These become major issues. We are now going by only Western definitions. Often these questions are asked, and this is the Indian perception. If you want to look, this is what it says. At what time does consciousness, that is mind bearing the self, entering and making it conscious? Now from then on it is an embryo, it has got a life. Prior to that it is not alive. That this is according to our Ayurvedic perception. And defects in the male and female seeds, effect of past actions, karma, uterine environment, mother's nutrition, all these may disturb the doshas and affect the fetal development. And this may also, this is the reason for fetal anomalies, a child being born with various types of congenital defects. And in summary, the embryo therefore is a product of father and mother, self, nutrition, mind, congeniality, that is between the parents. Congeniality is important for the formation of the embryo and its healthy development. Now here is a tabular statement. The contributor is on the left hand column and what it contributes to the fetal development according to Ayurveda. You will see the mother, all the soft parts in the fetus, these are contributed by the mother. The fathers, the hard tissues like bone, teeth, ligaments, these are all from the father. So if there is a congenital defect affecting the connective tissue, for example, somebody has a connective tissue disorder, that obviously is coming from the father's side. Self, entry into the united seed which vitalizes the self with the fetus, until then it is not alive. So therefore if you want to take the embryonal stem cells, you can take it earlier. This is what it follows according to Ayurveda. And it causes birth in higher species. Why should a child be born in a cow or a human being? That is really a contribution of the self, and it endows self knowledge, lifespan, consciousness, these are all derived from the self. And nutrition, the growth and consolidation of the body, energy, maintenance of breathing, all these are contributions of nutrition. And the mind enters in conjunction with the self, and it supports the sense organs, the source of tendencies, conduct, likes, memory, these are all contributions of the mind. But it has no independent entry, it always comes, it is powered by the self. And congeniality in food and lifestyle between father and mother, it determines good health, cheerfulness, fine voice, fertility of the individual. These are the contributions, and then it goes on the time horizons of the fetal development. In the first month, a shapeless mass, all constituents are endowed with all the qualities of 5 elements. 5 elements are Panchabhutas, and that it can develop into anything, total potential as we might say. And the second month it solidifies, this shapeless mass in the first month, it begins to consolidate, and a solid flesh-like and tumor-like, it can appear in these 3 forms. And these appearances suggest there is a possibility. The first one, if it is solid, consolidated, it is probably going to be male. If it is flesh-like, that is likely to be female, and if it is a tumor-like, still remains amorphous, then it could be a neutral gender, or it could end up in abortion. And the third is a very important, the second paragraph if you read, the body parts including sense organs appear in the 3rd month, consciousness makes its entry, that is self and mind, and the maternal and fetal hearts begin to beat in synchrony. Now this is called Dauhrida. There are 2 hearts in that person, mother's heart and the fetal heart, they are connected and they beat in synchrony. And as you know, later on we will be seeing this in Ayurveda, consciousness and emotional, cognitive functions, these are all located in the heart. So if these 2 hearts are joined, Dauhrida, 2 hearts, then what happens is many of the emotions, likes, dislikes, these are all kind of in continuum between the mother and the fetus. So many times you will find in women who are pregnant, 3rd month, they have what is called pica. These are very common, a woman who does not like sour articles, for example. Suddenly she might have a desire to eat that. Things which she had never liked to eat, they will express these strange desires. And there is a traditional belief that you should always satisfy that wish. And the reason for that, these wishes, strange wishes, are coming because there is another heart beating there. Now it is the fetal wishes of the baby for these unusual things. This is the traditional belief. That is why you should always satisfy these. And this is everywhere you will find this. They will, even the poorest person, he will go and secure what that woman wants, because that is the desire of that fetus, the heart of which is beating in synchrony with the mother's. This is a traditional belief. But there is a discussion in the Charaka Samhita, a seminar really, several disciples sitting, what starts the first part of the development, is which organ starts. Is it the joints? Is it the head? Is it the heart? Like that, each student is advancing his own view, and finally they could not agree, and Atreya, who is chairing this seminar, and he finally sums up by saying, you cannot really verify, because none of us have seen any of this. It is not verifiable. Therefore, he says all of them start simultaneously developing. That is how that, but that inquiry, the keenness to know which has the priority, that discussion was very active at that time, the subject of what we call embryogenesis. Now then it goes on, 4th month, the umbilical cord is connected to the fetus, but the other end, look at that, the placenta, the opposite side of the placenta, it is being, blood is coming from the mother, pulsatile is very important there. The opposite side of the placenta is connected to the mother's heart, which soaks the placenta with blood through pulsating vessels. That is very important, so that pulsatile vessels, pulsatile flow, that was recognized by. So obviously there was certain amount of like abortuses they must have seen. Without any observation they could not have written all this. May not have been a keen study like we do today, but at that time obviously without any observation they could not have written this story of embryogenesis. And 5th month, development of flesh and blood progresses steadily, and 6th month, mother's strength and complexion decrease, those of the fetus improve. 7th month, mother wears out, fetus is growing. 8th month, ebb and flow of ojas, between ojas, we will come to that later, between mother and fetus, transport of rasas, again the fetus is developing, mother's strength is declining, and delivery during this month is highly risky, 8th month, and 9th month is the time for parturition, and intrauterine stray beyond this is harmful to the fetus, which is very well recognized. And fetal anomalies, there are speculations on maternal and paternal factors and the causation of physical anomalies. There is a lot of discussion on this, and also personality types, not only the body anomalies but also personality types, sattvic, rajasic and tamasic. These are genetic according to Ayurveda, and they are classified on the basis of the guna, sattva guna, rajo guna, tamo guna. And these are distinct personalities. Sattvic, as you know, it is perfect in everything, virtuous individuals. In all Bhagavad Gita, they all talk about this, their taste for food, their interest in higher philosophy, being good to everybody, forgiveness. All these what we consider virtues, these are associated with the sattvic, where rajasic, they are proud, they can be fighting, all the aggressive qualities, these are all part of rajasic. Tamasic is the lazy, evil doing kind of people, prone to error in whatever they do. So these are 3 distinct personalities, and diseases also, the manifestation is influenced to some extent by this. A tamasic person's response to illness can be very different from that of a sattvic person. A rajasic person will be very demanding. So that a physician should be aware of the personality of the individual, of the patient, before he administers treatment to him, because the same approach will not work for all these 3. And body parts, here there is an enumeration of body parts in the Ayurvedic texts. But if you want to know, take for example rectum, it is mentioned in this, in one of the viscera it will be mentioned. But if you want to know the details, the anatomy of the rectum, you will not find here. That you will find in the discussion on piles. There is another very different subject. There you will find a good description. Rectum has got 3 curvatures, it has got folds inside. All these description you will not find here, but you will find it in a different section. This is the way it was taught in our Ayurveda. So there are 6 parts, 2 upper, 2 lower extremities, head and neck and trunk. These are the 6 parts, the broad divisions, angas, and then upangas. There are 56 smaller parts, all given in detail. Simply a listing is given, but details you will not find here. There are 9 orifices. Again, you will not find any details like mouth, for example, or nose. If you are looking for detailed information, you will find it somewhere else. Here it is a listing. And bones, there are 360. I will show the list later. Sense organs, there are 5. Motor organs, there are 5. And heart was regarded as the abode of consciousness. The location of the heart was known. And viscera, there are 15: heart, lungs, gallbladder, kidneys, livers, spleen, stomach, small intestine, rectum, colon, umbilicus is mentioned as viscera here. Marrow, brain, bladder, uterus, all these 15. These are, in fact, brain, you see it is listed here very clearly, but there is no reference to that, very little reference to Masthishka later on. In fact, consciousness is not connected with that. Ligaments are 900, veins 700, sira, large vessels 200, muscles 400. Many of these may not be accurate at all, because our way of learning anatomy, the dissection which I mentioned, was so imperfect. You could not, for example, here is a number, I could not calculate this number, I have taken it from the commentators, 29,956. How could you arrive at such an accurate figure? It is given by the commentator. I myself cannot convince how this number was arrived at. But fortunately, they have written that these minute things are not entirely visible. So there is a possibility that there is some guesswork in these kind of numbers, especially when it comes to srotas, channels. So Charaka explicitly says channels, there are channels which we can see, he gives the number, but there are innumerable channels which you cannot count. So that makes sense. And then depending on physical properties, the dominance of tissues such as bone and muscle, that density like bone, which is very dense. When you take blood, it is liquid. Now this type of physical properties, they are an indirect indication of the bhutas, because human body, yesterday I mentioned this, they are derived from the 5 bhutas, and you will find the analogues of those 5 bhutas in the body. Like earth is very heavy, and the bone is a derivative of earth, that is why it is very heavy. And light things, it will be up or water. So the physical properties of these tissues in the body, these are a reflection of the bhuta dominance. Which are the bhutas, the provenance of this, that is an indirect indication. And many of these, if you look at the association of the urinary bladder, location of these viscera, idea about its function, they were right. But only in 2 areas, lungs location was known, brain location was known, but the function was not known. These are 2 organs which I have found exceptions to this general accuracy of what they have mentioned. Like vas deferens, ureter, these are all location is known and function is also known. But these 2 areas, brain and lungs, location was known, but the function was far from clear. Now here are the numbers. Bones, you look at the modern in the left side column, and Charaka and Sushruta. If you look at the 4 extremities, Charaka says 110, Sushruta says 106, and the modern is 120. And if you look at the trunk, modern is 50, Charaka is 138, Sushruta is 128. these differences, head and neck, you will see that difference. The grand total is 200 according to modern anatomy in bones, but 360 in Charaka and also in Atharva Veda, and Sushruta is only 300. And this big difference comes because in the old system of counting, all the cartilage, teeth, all these hard tissues are counted as bone under the bone category. That is how this number becomes very large. Similarly, a protuberance in a bone, like a rib, there is a protuberance, or a femur, there is a protuberance, which is really part of that bone, but that protuberance was counted as a separate bone in the old classification. So that explains this difference. And then parts, muscles, you will see the Sushrutas 487 and the actual is only 213. Now this would be inaccurate because the way dissection was done, which I mentioned yesterday, because there were very great severe taboos about touching the human body. Touching the dead body was considered a defiling thing. You are defiled if you touch a dead body, leave aside cutting it. So the method followed was to take a cadaver, put it in a wooden case with openings, and this is put in shallow water and soaked for several days in a dark place, hidden away, not within the public view. It had to be done quietly, secretly, because it might invite opposition. And the way dissection was done without knife, they would use a sharp leaf edge to scrape off layer by layer. And then the next layer you see would be described. So naturally you will get very inaccurate, especially soft parts. Bones would be there or ligaments might be there. But when it comes to soft parts, you simply cannot expect accurate information on that. So you will find a lot of differences. And vital spots, this was an important concept because surgeons operating in certain areas could be very dangerous. A blood vessel you might cut. So one way, because dissection was defective, another way was during operations, during injury, suppose an accident in a war, and you actually see anatomy which is alive. Now all these were noted. Suppose in a war or an animal attacking somebody, a particular site, if there is an injury, that immediately is fatal. So over hundreds of years, these kind of collective information, that was the basis for this vital spots, the concept. And the importance for the surgeon, when he makes an incision, you had to stay away from these vital spots. That was the main reason why surgeons emphasized, especially Sushruta. There is not too much on this in Charaka, whereas the most detailed description comes in Sushruta for a very good reason, because he was a surgeon and locating the incisions, this was very crucial. And Rigveda also mentions Marman, and that became Marma in Ayurveda. And the vital, that term came because of this. Injury there could either result in death immediately or delayed death, or it could lead to deformities of one kind or the other. They were very serious, so that is how it was mentioned. Now these are in these vital spots, there are 107. Now these are dominated, there are 5 body structures, tissues associated in that place. There are muscle, blood vessel, ligament, bone, joints, these are all there, but not in equal proportion. For example, in corpus you will find lots of little bones there. There are 8 bones with number of joints. So joints will be dominating there. So here, based on that, the dominance of this, muscle there are 11, this is one classification of marmas. Blood vessels there are 41, a total of 107. That is one classification based on the dominance of that. Then on the body locations, there are 22 in the lower extremities, 22 in the upper extremities, chest and abdomen there are 12, back 14, head and neck 37. So that is the based on location. Then there is based on prognosis, what happens to life. Here instantly fatal. For example, the precordium between the 2 breasts in the center just above the pit of the stomach, that is a marma. Any damage is instantly fatal because they knew heart is located there. Fatal after passage of time, after several days. According to modern understanding, we would say it is probably because of infection, something, but it is delayed. Then there is a foreign body sticking there when the patient comes to you. and when you take out the foreign body he dies. That is another kind, again delayed. Then once it does not result in death, but results in gross deformity, that particular spot if there is an injury, and the cause of unbearable pain, that is another. So these are all based on the prognosis. Now surgery and vital spots, as I mentioned, is a very important issue for surgeons, mainly on the location of incisions. And prognosis, here if you look at that, immediately fatal or fatal after delay, and one explanation given at that time was, in the injury, if the vital spot, all the 5 structures are united and they are all injured, then it is instantly fatal. This was the explanation, one explanation. If 4 structures are united in this injury, then fatality is delayed. 3 structures, the foreign body is removed, death follows by escape of air. For us, we would say, could it be gas gangrene? That is the first thing we would think of. Foreign body is there, after some days you take it out, a lot of air comes out and the patient dies, and the gas gangrene is the most likely thing according to modern knowledge. But that was, and then 2 structures, there is deformity. Most obviously it is a nerve injury like a wrist drop, foot drop, all these kind of injuries. If a nerve is cut, that would follow a deformity. So that is the modern explanation for this, but they had a different explanation. So the anatomy available to the surgeon from cadaveric dissection was extremely limited. So this was supplementing that information to some extent, not very well, not adequately, but at least some help was given. And in fact all surgical operations, major operations in Sushruta Samhita, you do not find too many hymns or mantras being chanted. It was only in Atharva-Vedic times that was done. Mantras had largely disappeared from Ayurvedic texts, but before surgery, including the death of a fetus, removal, etc., there all these mantras were recited because they knew there was a very substantial risk. They had to take special permission from the king to do these procedures. So they knew the severity, the seriousness of this procedure. Now we come to, that is about as far as structure is concerned. We come to something about function. Now here we do not have, like what I mentioned in the beginning of this lecture, different systems as we are used to thinking, like respiratory system or cardiovascular system, genitourinary system. That is a modern way of learning physiology. But that way of putting things together did not exist at that time. But at the same time, with the limited information, they were capable of making great generalizations. That is something like in modern science, modern physiology. Claude Bernard, a great scientist in the 19th century in France, he was the one who developed this concept of constant internal environment. Now that is a cornerstone of physiology, because the external, outside can be, temperature can be anything, can be very cold, can be very hot, but inside the body it is constant. Similarly, you can take all kinds of Coca-Cola with a pH of 1.5, you can drink that. But inside the body, that is in the stomach, which is not really part of body, it is a koshta, it is a channel inside. But inside the body it is always constant, the pH. So therefore, whether it is chemical composition, it is strictly maintained. And if you do change that, like acidosis for example, a diabetic patient, that is almost leading to death. So that constant internal environment is a very important concept, generalization, not any particular system. Now this samya is something similar to that in Ayurveda. And samya, for example, it is a state of equilibrium. It is not, equilibrium is not just one unitary concept. There are several equilibria contributing to this. For example, dhatu samya. Dhatu, there are 7 dhatus, blood, muscle, bone, adipose tissue, etc. There are 7 dhatus in the body. Now these dhatus must have a balance, that is proportion to each other, proportion to the rest of the body. Body consists of other things also, not only dhatus. So that proportion, that must be maintained. That is the balance. Among themselves, between themselves and other parts of the body, that balance must be maintained. That is dhatu samya. If you, dhatu samya is equivalent to good health, well-being. If dhatu vaishamya, that is disturbed, disequilibrium, that is tantamount to disease. The next is dosha samya. Dosha, we will be discussing that in detail today. These are products of digestion, digestion of food, digestion of substrates in different body tissues. All these doshas are products of this digestion, one category, and they are very cornerstone of Ayurvedic physiology and pathology. They should be in balance. Vata, Pitta, Kapha, their proportions they should maintain among themselves to the rest of the body. So dosha samya is another. These two are not enough. If you want the Agni samya, there are the most important Agni which is burning in the body, derived from fire, Panchaphuta again. All these are derived finally from Panchaphuta. So the Agni in the stomach is the most dominant fire which digests all the food that we eat. But there are similar lesser Agnis burning in all the tissues, all the dhatus. Substrates are constantly being digested there by the activity of these fires. Dhatu Agnis or Dhatu Agnis. So these Agnis also should be in balance. Agni Samya. Then there is Ritu Samya. There should be a balance between the body interior and outside. And body itself constantly maintains. If the exterior becomes very cold, we will shiver so that we maintain our equilibrium to bring it to the previous ratio. If there is too much of heat, we sweat. The body reacts in different ways to regain that equilibrium. So Ritu Samya between the body and the environment. And lastly, there is Hetu Samya. Hetu means a cause. And these causes of diseases, all kinds of agents, they are present in the body all the time. They are present outside. You cannot get rid of all this. You cannot sanitize the body. You cannot sanitize the environment. But that doesn't mean that we are sick. Most of us are healthy people in spite of having all these causes within us. So that there is a balance between the cause within the body and the rest of the body. That's how we escape. So cause to produce a disease, that balance has to break down. There has to be a breach in this equilibrium. Then only disease manifests. So that is Hetu Samya. So you can see all these put together, that is the total composite equilibrium. That is a grand generalization. Now we take a digestion. This is one which is perhaps the best developed system described in Ayurveda, and this is received high priority obviously. And the food that is taken, it is digested in the stomach, Jatarakni, that is the most powerful Agni in the body. And in the stomach, this gastric fire or Jatarakni and the churning action, that is wind. And we will see later on, wind, for example, prana was the term used for wind in the body. And yesterday I mentioned this is an analog of the wind in the universe. And the wind in the body, for example, the breathing, they knew there is a air is breathing. But somebody who is passing flatus, that is also wind. And all the movement in the body, whether food is moving down, when you swallow it is going to the stomach, that is movement. Urine is moving. All these movements were powered by wind, Vayu. That is the motive of the whole human body. But these were all given different, all the movement, blood is moving, urine is moving, all this generalized movement in the body, this was given a particular name called Vyana. The wind, the upper part of the body that you are breathing, that is given a different name, Prana. That generic term is also used there. The flatus, that is Apana. So these are different, all Vayu, but it has got different compartments, compartmentalization. This is a concept in Ayurveda. So here, Samana Vayu, which is in the stomach, which is churning, with this Jatarakni, that is where digestion is taking place, the first part of digestion. And after the first digestion, there is Ahara Rasa, it forms an emulsive, mucinous type of a preparation, which is sweet in the beginning, mucinous, so it is Kapha dominated, that particular substance, early part of digestion. And very soon it turns sour and it moves on to the next stage, that is the Pakvasya. And this movement is Vyana, which is moving this. And these two, Ahara Rasa is one, the other is Mala, which is to be thrown out, the execrable part of digestion. These are the two components when it comes from the stomach to the next stage of Pakvashya, or what we call duodenum. And this, once it comes into Pakvashya, bile also joins there. And as the digestion progresses, this Ahara Rasa and Mala, they diverge in their ways. Mala is thrown out by Apana Vayu, it becomes desiccated, it becomes astringent, and it is eliminated as Mala, as feces. And the rest of it, that is the crucial part, the assimilable part of the body, of the food, that is the Rasa, which is a subtle substance. And here is the course which I have followed here. This Ahara Rasa, Mala has been eliminated, and Ahara Rasa, it becomes a fine, it is called a Rasa. There is no particular transformation there. It is a more subtle form of Ahara Rasa, or purified form. It is in the gut, and from there it passes to the heart through dhamanis. Now from the heart, this is the course which is mentioned there. This is Ahara Rasa, it goes to the heart through dhamanis, and from there it comes to liver, and the liver adds bile, and that is where blood is formed. The red color is imparted at that stage. And the blood from the liver, it also goes back to the heart through dhamanis, but the major part of it comes as blood, and then it has got a very interesting, here is the bile is added, I hope I can show that here. Bile is added at this point by the liver, and it becomes blood, assumes the red color. Here is the blood, the bile has been added, it has assumed the red color, that is the blood that we are familiar with. And the bulk of this goes and it is circulated all over the body through channels, which is what we find wherever there is an injury, blood comes, that is the blood, the major part of it. But there is another part of this blood, the finer part, which follows a different course that transforms itself into flesh, muscle. It is derived from blood. And from muscle it becomes adipose tissue, and adipose tissue it becomes bone, bone it becomes marrow, and marrow it becomes semen. And from semen is ojas, which is found in the fetal development, there is a mention of that. That is derived from semen. It has become more and more subtle as we go on. But what is to be noted here, in these transformations, like Ahara Rasa to blood, that transformation, one part becomes assimilable, that becomes blood. But there is a part, every time there is a digestive process, there is something assimilable and something which is execrable. That happened in the stomach, it happens in all these digestions. So here, where the Ahara Rasa, the blood is becoming muscle, for example. Now that transformation, the assimilable part becomes flesh, but the non-assimilable, that becomes in this case pitta. So pitta is actually derived from blood during this digestive process. It is a very part of Tridosha. Similarly, from bone, transformation to marrow, that bone, that execrable part is Vayu. Ahara Rasa turning to blood, that digestive process is the Tridosha, which is, that is Kapha. So all these three, I will show you a table later on, all these three Vata, Pitta, Kapha, these are essentially malas, execrable parts of this digestion which is taking place in the tissues of the body. And the rest of it forms all this, ultimately ending in ojas, which goes to the heart. This is the, what I could understand of the course of Ahara Rasa, that is course of digestive process. Now this is what I have just now said, written down in a form I hope you will be able to follow. And this cascade of changes, starting from Rasa Dhatu or Rasa all the way to the formation of ojas, that according to Sushruta takes place in 1 month. But as long as a person is alive, this is an endless process, it is part of life. Now malas, very important in Ayurveda. Unlike execrable, doesn't mean it is thrown out and you can forget all about it. The mala which is excreted, food, that yes you can forget it. But what is else during these transformations from muscle or blood or fat, etc., those malas are extremely important because they are as much important to the body as the other dhatus. They are actually called mala dhatus for this reason, provided they are within the healthy range. It is something like, to give an analogy, it is not proper to give modern analogies, but yesterday I mentioned, take for example urea or cholesterol. These are, we almost regard them in common language journalism, they are considered toxic substances, which is not correct. Actually they are body metabolites, they are essential for the body, but they are essential provided they are within the range. Cholesterol is necessary for the cell membrane integrity, for example, body makes it, but if it goes beyond the range then it becomes toxic, it is dangerous. So here the malas have a similar kind of rationale. The malas which are forming vata, pitta, kapha, which vata is formed when bone becomes marrow, that digestive process, vata is formed. Pitta is formed when blood is being transformed into flesh. So these malas which are formed during digestive process in the tissues, they are malas, but as long as they are within the healthy range, they are essential for the body, they are dhatus. But once they cross that, then they become abnormal, they cause disease. Now these are the body component and the mala resulting, like rasadhatu, kapha is formed, blood, pitta is formed, flesh, waste in body apertures, adipose tissue, sweat, bone, vata is formed, and marrow, waste in the eyes, and the sebum, the natural oily surface of the skin. So these are the malas resulting from transformation or metabolism in different dhatus. Now Tridosha doctrine, this vata, pitta, kapha, it dominates Ayurveda, and the previous slide I have shown how these are formed. This is simply a restatement of the same thing. Now Tridosha is again, it is shown in a diagrammatic form here. We have already done that. Food, the ahara rasa is on the left hand side. We have already covered that, how it goes on from rasa to blood, blood to flesh, adipose tissue, bone, marrow, semen. What is not shown here is semen going on to ojas. And if you look at that, the malas, the central part, you will see partly it comes from food, but the rest of it is coming from all these digestive process in the tissues. So it has two sources. One is coming from food, not the kitta, which is what feces is, that is different. It does not become part of malas. But malas derived from food is one, and derived from all the tissues is another. Those are the two sources of malas or dhatu malas, and part of it will be excreted, thrown out, but the rest of it forms Tridosha. And this Tridosha, vata, pitta, kapha, they are dhatu malas as long as they remain within the normal range, they are essential, because all human beings have it. You cannot have a life without doshas, but they are dhatu malas, essential. But once they cross, they breach that limit, then they become doshas. This is a, and you will see that Vagbhata quote, a bird flies all day, every day, but does not leave the shadow. Just like that, doshas are always there in the causation of diseases. It is within that range. There can be no disease without doshas playing no role. And then if the imbalance of doshas are so important in the formation of diseases, causation of diseases, do they have anything to do with predisposition to diseases? That is a legitimate question. Now here, this is the important consideration when you look at the predisposition to diseases as a result of doshas. That means there is something in the constitution of the individual reflecting these doshas which would be responsible, that is dosha prakriti. Charaka and Sushrita, they do not agree exactly on that, but they both agree that these are genetic, these dosha are determined at the time of conception, on which there is no difference of opinion, and the dosha dominated constitution is important for the physician, because the diseases manifest differently in these three different constitutions, they progress differently, and their response to treatment is also different. So that is why this dosha prakriti determination is so very crucial in Ayurveda. Now here the examples, the traits, the determination is done on the basis of a cluster of traits. These are physical traits, mental traits, behavioral traits. So the prakriti itself is determined at the time of conception, does not change, and it manifests through a series of traits. Now here I have given some examples of Vatala. A person is Vatala. These are some of the low strength, short stature, all these. There are many others. Similarly, Pittala, moles, pimples, wrinkles on the skin, poor longevity, fecundity, etc. These are all in relation to Pittala personality. And the third is Shleshmala, or a Kapha dominated constitution. Now this is a very important element in research also. There is a group in Pune who have developed a computer assisted, what is called IUSoft, a software program they have developed. We have also used it in easy reproducible determination of the prakritis. When an individual comes into an outpatient department determining the prakriti, it has been done always intuitively by a senior physician. They talk to them, half an hour or 45 minutes they usually take, and they intuitively decide that this is Vata, Pitta. That is how it has been done. It is still being done like that. But there are interobservational variations. So this IUSoft is one way to standardize the determination. It is still being perfected. We have also used it in one of our research programs, and we found that the correlation, the intuitive determination of prakriti, computer assisted determination, there is a 75% correlation. Now circulation of blood, it is a debated subject. What is known, what is speculated, I will mention here. Heart, the location was known, gross appearance was known, internal structure was not known. Three types of vessels are connected to the heart: dhamanis, siras and srotas. It is almost impossible to say exactly what these are. There was a tendency, I also used to think that dhamanis are arteries, which are not correct, because dhamanis are also believed to carry nerve impulses. So it is very difficult to identify these as arteries, veins and lymphatics. All we know is they are all conduits, they are channels. A lot of substances move through them. That is about all that we can say about these. And heart is the receptacle into which three types of fluids come. One is blood, the other is the ojas, and the third is rasadhatu. All these three will come into the heart through these conduits. And heart and the distribution of blood, three fluids coming into the heart, they are all vital. Blood is received from the liver. Ojas is a slightly yellowish fluid residing in the heart, whose depletion is fatal. As I mentioned in the progression of dhatu formation, you have the marrow, the semen, and then it is ojas. So that depletion of ojas is fatal, and rasadhatu also, the primary seat is the heart. All these three are flowing into the heart through different dhamanis, and they are distributed from the heart. This is well known if you look strictly at the description, through conduits all over the body, and which consume them. There is no mention of these substances coming back to the heart. The ingress into the heart is mentioned. They are remaining in the heart is mentioned. Passing out is mentioned through these conduits, but return, that is not mentioned. So distribution of the blood from heart, not by pumping. The pumping action of the heart was not observed. Pulsatile flow was observed, the placenta which I mentioned, very clear mention of placental, the vessels, there is pulsatile movement, that is mentioned. But pumping of the heart is not noted. The venous return, after all, if you are distributing blood for a circulation, it has to come back. Now venous return is not mentioned. the heart and the distribution. Therefore, the pumping is not observed, but pulsatile flow in blood vessels was noted. Siras by their contractility and expansibility, like rivers and streams nourishing fields, that is what Sushruta says. So, through these channels from the heart, these are flowing all over the body. The heart as a reservoir holding various fluids distributes them all over, but it is replenished. It cannot be creating, it has to get it from somewhere. Now that, it is not by these things coming back in a modified form like Venus return, but it is actually coming from the original source, food. Rasadhatu, it is actually coming from food. So that is how it is replenished. And this circulation according to Sushruta, 30 days and so on. So that is how the heart was receiving this blood or ojas or rasadhatu. It comes from these different sources, mainly from food and also digestion in the tissues. That is how heart receives this, which it distributes. Not that pulsatile action is not mentioned and there is no venous return mentioned. So therefore, circulation of blood as we understand, there was a circulation but of a different kind. That is what we should distinguish. And the blood itself, if you read Sushruta's description, one of the 7 body components alongside Vata, Pitta and Kapha. So it is almost given the status of another dosha, and the color of molten gold or insect Indragopa, Gunja seeds, and perturbation by Vata, Pitta and Kapha give the distinctive colors. That is bright red, darkish yellow and so on. So blood in the normal state flowing through its specific siras strengthens body components, improves complexion and enables proper performance of body functions. That is Sushruta's definition. Now heart as a seat of consciousness, this is a very interesting, very important. All the 3 Brihatrayi, Charaka, Sushruta, Vagpada, they all agree that heart is the seat of consciousness. Even though all 3 were aware that there is a brain, but it was not credited with any of these cognitive or emotional functions. And heart supports the whole body, its parts, sense organs. The vital nature of heart was known because damage to heart was fatal, that was recognized. There has been an effort to mind and self being in the heart that people have tried to explain by saying they depend on the heart for proper functioning. That is kind of stretching the point. It is very clearly mentioned they are in the heart and we should take it at that. And the conduits, dhamanis, siras and srotas connected to the heart, they transport not only blood but they also transport rasadhatus and ojas. But when they come into the heart, 3 different, one is rasadhatu derived from food, blood which is a further derivative and ojas the last among the derivatives. How do they partition within the heart? Because there was no idea about the interior anatomy of the heart. How are these fluids partitioned? That is not mentioned. Some dhamanis also carry nerve impulses. And that is the basis when we say heart is the seat of consciousness. These dhamanis which are carrying nerve impulses, they are the agents of that consciousness. Then we come to respiration here, life breath. Prana is the term which is used, but it is primarily located in the head and neck. Udana, another compartment which I mentioned, the compartmentalization of life breath. Prana, depending on the location, what is moving in the upper part of the body, what is moving in the lower part of the body, what is moving blood and other substances all over the body. These are all different compartments of the wind in the body. So here prana is primarily in the head and neck, udana in the chest and throat, and mahasrota, there is a lot of confusion. Mahasrota is also, it means the gut, the alimentary canal, that is also mahasrota. But it is also pranavaha srotas. Pranavaha is not food. So both, this mahasrota signifies both, and that bears the life breath, the prana. And among the functions of vata, which is one of the 3 doshas, Charaka mentions inspiration, expiration, speech, control of the mind, origin of joy, ignition, fire, etc. Any movement, any motion in the body, these are all done by Vayu. Without that, even say for example a perturbed Pitta for example, or a perturbed Kapha, it is localized in one place, but for this to travel out, to be transmitted all over the body to produce disease, that is done by Vata. So that any motive force, that is all due to Vata. And moisture in the air, expired air, was observed. And lungs, with all this description of inspiration, expiration, prana, kloma and pupusa, there are two terms used to indicate lungs and in the listing of anatomy, but they were not connected with respiration, lungs. Just like the brain was not connected with consciousness, this is not connected with respiration. Sometimes chest uras, that is used synonymously with lung in terms of injuries especially. And the vital role of life breath and some of its functions were appreciated, but the central role of lungs in respiration was not recognized. And now the nervous system, Charaka Sushruta, the term head is used because it was the seat of all the sense organs, so it is extremely uttamanga, the best among organs. But the Masthishka, the brain, that is also used among the viscera, you saw it mentioned there. And Sushruta in one place, he talks about 4 pairs of nerves carrying impulses from sense organs in the head, eye, ear, nose and tongue. These were attached to the brain, he writes there. But somehow consciousness he locates in the heart. This was not connected with that. Like Charaka, he also held seat of the mind, consciousness and sensation was the heart. And going on, Sushruta, the 4 dhamanis, he talks about 4 other dhamanis which traverse horizontally, ramify in the skin, carrying pleasurable and pain sensations to the heart. The transport of sensations through nerves was appreciated, but the channels, the dhamanis, were also regarded as the conduits for blood, rasadhatus and ojas. So the dhamanis actually share, it is a common conduit through which all these can transit. That is the way it is presented. And Charaka Sushruta, as I mentioned, also mentions 4 pairs of dhamanis carrying sound, sight, smell, taste, sensations. They are obviously nerve impulses and they are traced to the brain. And there is a certain difficulty in understanding this. He was aware of these nerves carrying from sensations from sensory organs like eyes and ear connected to the brain, but consciousness that was located in the heart. And the Ayurvedic dissociation of brain and the nervous system from cognition and mental activity, it is something very in sharp contrast to the ancient description of nervous system. If you look at the yoga system, there is a very different, they are talking about different levels of consciousness. The Ida Pingala and the Sushumna. Now that yogic description of consciousness is so entirely, very detailed descriptions are there, and that obviously shows the consciousness is in the brain. But here in Ayurveda, they would have nothing to do with it. So there is the yogic system, I cannot believe it is much later than Ayurveda. That is also a very ancient system. How this ancient system of yoga, where consciousness is very definitely associated with the brain, the spinal cord, because spinal cord also there is consciousness. In physiology we learn, for example, if you have an animal preparation, if the head is cut off, a spinal animal, only the spinal cord is there. But if you take a pin and prick that spinal animal on the foot, there is immediately a withdrawal reflex. So that pain sensation is there. So a spinal animal also has some amount of consciousness. So the yoga system where you keep on increasing your level of consciousness, your awareness, most of us are conscious only at the lower level. By constant practice you keep on enlarging this domain of consciousness, higher and higher levels until you come to the top of the brain. You almost become super sensuous. That kind of complete association of consciousness with the central nervous system, that is lacking in Ayurveda for whatever reason. But I think we should take note of it.